As noble human beings, we seek a deep explanations for why anything exists. Let us journey together on a multi-part story about reality. We seek for the deepest possible story of existence. Our stage is set by a puzzle. This puzzle arises from the attempt to explain things as far as we can. In general, you might think we can expect an explanation of things, whatever they are. For example, if we see a sphere in a forest, we can expect some explanation of its existence, even if we have no idea what it is. But the general expectation of an explanation leads to the puzzle. The expectation of an explanation seems to break when applied to reality as a whole. For there is nothing beyond all of reality that could explain why there is a reality at all. But how can a reality exist without any explanation? Is this puzzle answerable? We shall divide our puzzle into two pieces. 1. The principle of universal explanation. Whatever exists, individual or plural, has some explanation, in terms of prior causes or conditions. 2. The principle of unexplained existence. There is no explanation of the total of all that exists. Of course, these puzzle pieces cannot fit together. It is not possible that reality has and does not have an explanation. Instead, our total reality somehow exists on its own, without any prior cause or condition that might explain its existence. The puzzle of existence, then, is about seeing how any reality could exist without any outside explanation. We can grant that reality as a whole has no outside explanation. But that invites an intriguing question. How can any reality, big or small, exist without depending on anything prior to it? Let us now journey together in search of a solution to this puzzle of existence. First, a story that explains why certain things exist in terms of a foundational reality, the grandest story there is, our story. In Part 2, we will extend this story to explain how a foundational reality can itself avoid the need for a further explanation. Finally, in Part 3, we will consider how this story compares with other attempts to explain existence, and will seek to show that this story has a certain explanatory advantage, or to put it less modestly, that this story is the best. Parts 2 and 3 will come in future videos. Part 1. The Foundation Story. Once upon a time, at the foundation of all reality lived what we may call stuff. The name stuff does not signify anything in particular except this. Stuff does not depend on anything prior. In this sense, stuff is self-existent. There is nothing prior to stuff that explains, grounds, or produces it. In the fullness of time, stuff gives rise to everything else. End of scene. Call this story the Foundation Story. In the interest of neutrality, we shan't say anything yet about the nature or contents of stuff, whether it includes one thing or many, matter or energy, concreta or abstracta. All we shall say here is that stuff includes whatever is self-existent, that is, non-dependent on anything prior. Moreover, the foundation story leaves open theories of how stuff may give rise to other things, whether via causation, grounding, or some other relation. We will now offer two reasons one might like the foundation story. My interest here is not to suggest that there cannot be any reasons to dislike the story. Rather, I want to offer some considerations that can weigh in the balance of one's total considerations. First, the foundation story lays a foundation for solving the puzzle of existence. The puzzle of existence, recall, presents a challenge with seeing how there can be any reality, given that nothing exists outside of our total reality to explain why or how anything exists at all. We may wonder then, how can a reality, of any size or shape, exist? The foundation story offers the beginning of an answer. A reality can exist by including something that exists on its own, i.e., something that does not depend on any outside explanation of its existence. This isn't the complete solution. After all, we may still wonder how the self-existent stuff itself can exist without any outside explanation. We will return to this question in the next section. For now, we shall offer the foundation story as a first part of our larger story. A second related reason one might like the foundation story is that it makes possible a deep explanation of dependent things. For if there is a foundational reality, then all dependent things, one or many, can have an explanation in terms of something more fundamental. The non-dependent, self-existent stuff would provide an ultimate basis for the existence of dependent things, of why any dependent things exist at all. We will elaborate on this reason for the foundation theory. We will first consider two motivations for preferring explanatory depth. Then we will turn to some objections that help clarify what's at stake. One motivation for preferring explanatory depth comes from instances of the following principle. P.E. Dependent things, one or many, have an external explanation of their existence, ceteris paribus. This principle is relatively modest. P.E. does not require a fully deterministic explanation. It is compatible with P.E. that the explanation help reduce some mystery in terms of non-deterministic causes or conditions. P.E. also does not require that everything has an explanation. Instead, P.E. points to an explanatory advantage, other things being equal, of an external explanation of the existence of dependent things. P.E. is itself supported by a successful track record of external explanations. There are many evident instances of an external explanation. For example, you might witness a fire contribute to an explanation of the burning of a house. Or if you see a set of boxes on a table, you can expect an explanation of their existence. Same if you see a set of turtles, blue cubes, or red blobs. None of these explain their own existence, if they are dependent, and all of them depend on explanations beyond themselves. Examples multiply. Our claim is not that the examples provide a conclusive proof of an exceptionless principle. To my knowledge, there are no exceptions to P.E. However, even if there are exceptions somewhere, like a chain of blue beings somewhere that exists without any external explanation, one could still have reason to expect an external explanation of any given case, other things being equal. The idea here is that if we are to make an exception, we carry a burden to motivate the exception, to supply a reason to think that the exceptional case is different in some relevant way from all other totals of dependent things. In the absence of a reason to make an exception, the track record of experience supports a general expectation of an external explanation. If this is correct, then by the light of P.E., we have some reason to expect an external explanation of the total of all dependent things in terms of something non-dependent, i.e., self-existent stuff. In the interest of modesty, we will leave open the prospect of identifying a reason to make an exception to P.E. Someone might have independent reasons to doubt that any self-existent stuff could exist or could bring about non-self-existent effects. Those reasons could then motivate making an exception to P.E. This possibility is open. Another type of motivation for preferring explanatory depth is a direct intuition. Consider this principle of dependence. P.D. Totals of dependent things are, by nature, dependent. According to P.D., dependent things cannot, just on their own, add up to some independent total. One might find this principle evident, not merely by a successful track record, a posteriori evidence, but also by insight into the relevant concepts, a priori evidence. For my part, this intuition comes to life in my mind when I consider examples that display obvious irrelevant differences between dependent totals. Take any total of dependent blue blobs, for example. Add them up. The total of the blue blobs, whether stacked on a desk or filling an infinite ocean, would also be dependent. Mere dependence is not enough to explain, make, determine, or result in independence. We claim one can see this by insight into the nature of dependence. Anyone who shares our intuition on this point has an analytical, a priori-based reason to favor the foundation story. I now turn to some objections. First, some philosophers have suggested that perhaps there is no need for an external explanation of dependent things in the case of an infinite regress. For example, maybe by explaining each state of reality in terms of prior states, we could thereby have a complete internal explanation of the total of all dependent states. If the explanation can be internal, then perhaps reality could consist of a bottomless chain of explanations without any external explanation. Then there is no foundational reality. We have 2 points to make in response. First, there are different types of explanation that need not preclude each other. We can concede the possibility of internal explanations, at least for sake of argument. We do not need to rule out the conceivability of an internal explanation of a certain type to see that an external explanation would still contribute a deeper explanation. It is important to note that the foundation story allows for an infinite regress. The mere age of a thing, even an infinite age, does not by itself explain the existence of that thing. For example, an eternal light might have a more fundamental explanation in terms of an eternal light source. In the same way, an infinite chain of dependent things might, in total, have a more fundamental explanation in terms of some foundational reality. That isn't ruled out. What is ruled out, rather, is a bottomless, ungrounded, and unexplained chain of dependent things. Second, and are more fundamentally, we think there is a good reason to expect an external explanation, ceteris paribus. To illustrate the value of a deeper explanation, consider the following scenario. Imagine that an infinite stack of turtles appears in the sky. As it happens, this turtle stack emerged via a supertask, where each turtle gave birth to the one above at increasingly fast rates. The first birth took 1 second, the second took 0.5 seconds, the third took 0.25 seconds, and so on, with each turtle emerging twice as quickly as the one before. In this case, the event of all infinite turtles emerging occurs in just 2 seconds. Let us grant that in some sense the event would be internally explained, since each member is explained by another. Still, it does not follow that the event of infinitely many turtles emerging would thereby have no external explanation. On the contrary, if there could be such an infinite chain, one could still expect an external explanation of its occurrence, whether the chain exists in finite time or is spread across infinite time. While the turtle scenario may be outlandish, it points the value of explanatory depth. An external explanation of dependent things, whether finite or infinite, predicts that chains of turtles will never inexplicably appear in front of you. This prediction matches observation. It isn't just turtles, of course. If there were blue cubes that emerged from other blue cubes in an infinite sequence, we could wonder why there are any blue cubes at all. Why not instead red ones, or none at all? Another example comes from Leibniz, 1697. If geometry books were copied from other geometry books, ad infinitum, we could surely still wonder why there are any geometry books at all. In general, it may appear to make no difference what dependent things the chain includes or how long the chain is. Unless we can identify a relevant difference between some particular chain in question, there is an advantage in explaining the chain in terms of something outside that same chain. Another type of objection is that we can explain things by abstract principles instead. For example, we might explain the existence of our universe by some laws of physics or by the improbability of no universe. Perhaps then there is no need for a foundational reality. My response here is like my previous response. We can recognize different types of explanation. Rather than choose between explanations, we can grant that abstract principles may provide a type of explanation. Abstracta may even be part of the total foundational explanation. We will return to this point later when I discuss how our theory can incorporate Platonism. More fundamentally, there is value in having an explanation that goes beyond merely abstract laws and probabilities. Consider that abstract principles, on their own, are powerless to provide prior causal conditions for the existence of dependent things. For example, the principle that positively charged particles repel does not itself bring particles into existence. While abstract principles may indeed provide some kind of explanation, PE and PD invite us to pursue an explanation that goes deeper than mere principles themselves. The foundation story supplies the materials for a deeper explanation. It supplies the stuff. If self-existent stuff exists, then we can, in principle, have an explanation of all chains, collections, and series of dependent things. All come from the self-existent stuff, ultimately. This completes our presentation of the first part of the story. Return for parts 2 and 3 of our great story of reality very soon.